Hello everyone. Tonight we will relax with the story of how medieval people survived a day when the crops failed. Let's get started. You wake up in a rotting straw hut in the middle of a cold spring that is no longer as fresh as it has been in. Years passed. There is no bread, no porridge, no rooster crowing, only the rumble of your stomach like a thin-skinned drum that has been beaten too hard. You run your hand over your chest, where once upon a time there had been the warmth of dinner, and now there is only bones and clothes as thin as scraps of paper. You open the door, and the cold air rushes in, as if the outside world is reminding you that nothing better awaits you. The wind carries the smell of rotting earth and damp straw, but worse than that is the smell of hunger, the lingering smell of empty cowsheds, of empty ash pans, of smokeless roofs. Outside, the neighbors shuffle about like zombies, all trying to look busy, hosed to inspect the fields, though there's nothing left to plant, or tapping on the hollows of the trees, as if the radishes will fall out. You know that today will be no different, because this year's crop has failed, not because you're lazy, not because it hasn't rained. It's because there's been too much rain, and the wind is too cold, and the soil is soggy, and the seeds are rotting in the sack. One event that sticks in your mind is the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, 3 years, when God, as the priests said, shut up heaven and threw the key into the Thames. That year, like this one, the rains never stopped, the barley didn't sprout, and even healthy children became noticeably thinner in a week. History books tell of people eating roots, bark, even grass. But grass wouldn't grow when the ground was as cold and wet as the heart of a tax collector. You drag yourself to the granary you dug behind the house last fall, where the sacks of golden barley once held. There's nothing left. You ate them. All weeks ago, the sacks are gnawed by rats, and in a dark corner, there's only a few dried onion skins. A curious fact. There were people in France at that time who sold fake cakes made from clay mixed with ashes, claiming that eating them will make you feel full. Even though they knew they were poisonous, people still bought them. Because when you're hungry, you're not afraid of dying. You're only afraid of running out of food. You pull your hand out of the barn and sniff. Your hand is covered in dust and mold. You can no longer smell it. Your nose is too used to the smell of scarcity. You look out at the field. Empty, the young rice is crushed, the old rice has been eaten. Even the birds have left. Historians still debate whether this was a global climate change or just a series of bad years. Some say the sun dimmed during the Little Ice Age, making summers as cold as autumns and winters as long as stories. Don't need an explanation? All you know is that your fields are dead, your stomach is hungry, and your house is empty except for the howling wind. You turn inside and try to start a small fire, but the coals are damp, the fire is weak, and there is more smoke than light. You sit huddled, holding your stomach, listening to it ring like church bells. You used to dream of big meals, crusty bread, salted meat, roasted vegetables and fat, but now you dream of something smaller, a bowl of thin porridge. No meat, no salt. Just warm and liquid, so before you get too comfortable. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually like what I do here. And if you're somewhere with lights, a fridge, and hot food, leave your location and local time. Now turn off the lights. Let's relax together with tonight's journey. You snuggle under the thin blanket, thinking about tomorrow, about what you'll eat, if there's anything left to eat. And in that moment between hunger and dreams, you hear your stomach growl again, reminding you that this story is just beginning. You sit on a rickety wooden bench, clutching a cake in your hand. No, cake is too much of a stretch. A dark brown mass, dry and earthy. It's not spongy, not fragrant, not crunchy, and it doesn't go down easily at all. You've made it with what's left. Barley bran, some rotten sawdust, a handful of oil-pressed hulls, and dirty water from the thatched roof. You take a bite. The first taste is acrid. The second is chicken coop. The third taste makes your teeth stop. There's ice in the cake. You spit it out, but don't throw it away. No. You put it back in your tie pocket, because maybe you'll try it again tonight. If it doesn't rain, you remember eating white bread, if only once at Easter. It was soft, yeasty, a little salty, a little fatty, and it melted in your mouth like a warm dream. That dream lies behind a door called failure of harvest. When the fields are dry, when the seeds don't sprout, you don't have flour. And when there's no flour, you grind up anything that resembles a grain bark. No, old leaves. One historical event that people will never forget is the famine of 1316. That was the year that bran bread became the national dish. People called it by all sorts of ironic names: clay bread, sad bread, or devil's bread. In some ancient records, victims who ate it suffered convulsions, blindness, or delirium. Historians still debate whether it was poisoning from the mold in the bran, or whether it was the soil mixed in with the bread that affected their nerves. You don't know. Just know that you're alive. Hey, for now. You recall the scene. This morning a village woman was scattering ashes from her fireplace into the fields, not to fertilize her plants, but to find lost onion peels. Another was grating nettle roots, drying them and pounding them into powder to mix with bran to make it less bitter. A strange fact, in some places it is believed that if bread is made of black bran, the devil will not recognize you when you die of hunger. It sounds like a child's story, but when you are hungry, you are willing to believe anything. As long as it allows you to eat, you suddenly hear a voice calling from outside. It's your neighbor, Mrs. Maris, inviting you to come over and try some new bread. You follow, knowing her reputation for being stingy. She holds out a square block that looks like broken brick. Branch mixed with radish ashes, she says, plus a little sawdust from the blacksmith. It's delicious, with a sweet aftertaste. You chew. This time, your teeth can handle it, but your stomach reacts with a slight cramp. You hold your stomach and laugh awkwardly. Mrs. Maris also laughs. It's lucky that something goes into your stomach. Yesterday, an old man from the village above swallowed a piece of boiled rope. He said it was. It's easy to digest. The monks in the area still advise you to eat simply like God, but they still eat salted fish, sour cheese, and black bread that actually contains flour. You can't blame them. After all, why bother making flour? You come home with a handful of leftover bran. It's gray. It's not the kind of gray that promises rain. Just the gray of days when nothing happens. No wind. No birds. No hope. You light a fire, pour water into the pot, mix in the bran, and shape the cakes. Your hands shake. Not from the cold, but from exhaustion. You hold each small cake over the coals, hearing the cheap dough crackle like brittle bones. The smell of burning fills your nose. You cough, but you don't put out the fire. You still need to eat. There's an academic debate you've heard. Did these bran cakes save lives or kill them? Some historians call them a mark of resilience, others a stigma of primitive agriculture. To you, the cake has no name. It's just the reason you're alive another day. You wrap 2 of the cakes in a rag, saving them for the night. Then you lie down, still empty, but at least with the small promise that tonight there will be something to chew. And that's enough. To keep you closed as the fire burns out, you wake in the middle of the night to a faint sound, a rustling in the corner of your tent. Your eyes widen as if you've never slept, because the sound isn't wind, nor is it insects. It's the sound of hope. Crawling. A fat mouse is sniffing around the remains of a bran cake. You sit up quietly, not disturbing anyone. Your hand goes to the dull knife hidden under the rags. The mouse turns around, its eyes shining like two gems in the darkness. You don't find it cute. You see breakfast. You rush at it like a hungry cat, but miss. It runs. You chase. In the process, you knock over the pot, spilling dirty water on your feet. No matter, you don't stop. Because you remember, yesterday morning, Old Man Bram showed you a roasted mouse. The fat melted, the skin cracked, the aroma rising like a holy dream. It sounds horrible. In times of famine, you can't resist meat. Rats, cats, dogs, lizards. As long as there's meat, you can eat it. One story you've heard is that during the Great Famine of 1317 in Ghent, the mayor had to ban the killing of cats because the people ate all the mice, causing the rats to multiply and destroy the grain. Banned. But who can resist an empty stomach? Do you remember how a village woman showed you how to prepare a rat, shave off the fur, gut it, clean it if there is any water, stuff it with bran, mixed with ashes, and roast it over a low fire? She called it peasant sparrow. It sounded like a feast, but it actually smelled like burnt rags. You don't catch up with the mouse that night, crawls into the hole in the wall and disappears. But the next morning, you go outside and see a dead cat by the fence. Someone must have seen it before you did because its ears have been cut off, and its belly is swollen. You stand there not knowing whether to feel disgust or regret. Here's a weird fact you may have heard. In medieval Italy, people sold cat meat for twice the price of chicken. Why? Because cats are harder to catch, and to someone who's tired of pellets, cat meat tastes like talking rabbit meat. You remember that afternoon? People started setting mouse traps in public instead of hiding them. Some made them out of cardboard and twine. Others just sat around with sticks. The children became great hunters. They stalked mice all day, then showed off their catch-like treasures. One of them laughed and said, "Short-tailed mice have more meat." You didn't object. You just thought it would be great if there was salt. Historians still debate whether rat-eating was actually common or just a post-famine myth. But you, the person who plucked a rat yourself, know. No one needs to write it down. The proof is in the bite mark on your palm where the rat fought. Back before succumbing to its fate, you take the day's catch a mouse the size of your hand home. You build a fire, skewer it on a bamboo stick, and roast it slowly over the low flame. The smell of burnt fat rises, mingling with ash and the smell of mud on your feet. Everything smells, but you swallow it. It's not tender, not chewy, but there's something warm about it, and your stomach quiets for the first time in days. You don't finish it all. You save the bones to make broth. Maybe tomorrow it will smell like soup. Even if it's just an imaginary smell. The academic argument you hear from a traditional healer, rats carry disease and should not be eaten. Another argues, if the disease survives in a farmer's kitchen, it deserves to kill. You don't argue, because you have no choice. That night, you lie awake listening to the mice scurrying across the roof. Not angry, not afraid, just hoping they're fatter than yesterday. Because if tomorrow you're hungry, you'll hunt again. You wake to the sound of rain on the thatched roof. Not a heavy rain, just a light drizzle, the kind that softens the soil and makes wild plants sprout as quickly as the tavern gossips. You sit up, looking at the empty little pot, where only a little oil floats like a dream. Yesterday you ate the last roasted rat. Today, to survive, you must eat leaves. You step outside with a torn bag, scanning the ground like a hunter. But instead of deer, you look for nettles, pennywort, wild mustard, and anything green that has never killed someone immediately after eating it. You're not alone. Along the way, you see an old woman poking moss with a stick, and a child plucking weeds as if harvesting a field. You recall the old village priest saying, "When God took away the grain, he left the leaves. Beautiful, but eating the leaves also required luck. A historical event that comes to mind is the famine years in England in the early 14th century. When people ate both wild Malabar spinach and wormwood, some lived, others hallucinated or had diarrhea for weeks. You pick a handful of the green, prickly, earthy, hopeful mixture. You also find some purslane creeping, slightly sour plant. You sniff it, and it doesn't smell strange. Good sign. At least it's not the same plant that made the blacksmith faint the day before. A curious fact. The ancients believed that eating nettles during the famine helped cleanse the blood and keep the memory from drifting away with hunger. You don't know if your blood is clean, but your memory is still vivid, especially the meat porridge your mother used to cook when you were a child. You gather enough for a stew and head home. First, build a fire. The wood is damp and there's more smoke than fire, but you persevere. The pot boils with water collected from last night's rain. You drop in handfuls of vegetables, listening to the soft sizzle. There's no salt, no oil, no meat, but hot vegetable broth is still a luxury. The smell isn't appealing, but it's not nauseating. That's enough. Historians still debate the medieval accounts of hunger soup. Did it actually save lives, or did it just temporarily fill stomachs and make them weaker? For you, it doesn't matter, because when you take a spoonful, it warms your throat, and for that brief moment, stop shivering. You share some with the neighbor's kid. He grins, eats, and tells a story about a singing frog in the garden. It's a lie, but you laugh too. Because when you're hungry, laughing is the easiest way to stop crying. You dry the remaining leaves you have saved and your straw sandals that have been wet for days. Oh, the rain has stopped. The sky is still gray, but not as threatening as yesterday. At least the wild grass is still growing, and the water is still falling. An academic debate you may recall is, if medieval people knew how to distinguish between good and bad weeds, why were there so many cases of poisoning? Some scholars say they were just taking risks based on smell. You think otherwise. It was survival instinct. Given the choice between poisonous herbs or an empty stomach, they chose hope. That evening, you finish your cold soup, close your eyes, and feel your stomach. Not completely empty. And that, on a bad day, is a small miracle. You are thirsty. Not the thirsty kind from working in the fields, but a parched thirst that reaches from your throat to your gut. The rainwater you collected the day before is gone. The burlap-covered jar is now only slightly damp at the bottom. You shake it, hoping the last drop will fall. But all you hear is the hollow sound of air. You carry the chipped ceramic pot, walking heavily towards the canal at the entrance of the village. This canal, years ago, was where children competed to float their leaf boats. Now, it is a quagmire of despair. The water's murky, scum-filled, filled with dead insects and a pungent, sour smell, but you do not retreat. Because your intestines are contracting so painfully. You bend down, skimming the top, hoping to get the layer with less bacteria. One event you might remember is the diarrhea epidemic that swept through the region in 1322, when people had to drink water from ditches after wells ran dry. Survivors of the epidemic called it the year of the wet belly, which would sound funny if it weren't for the fact that more people died of thirst than hunger. You return and boil water on the fire. The fire is weak, the wood wet, and the water evaporates slowly, like someone hoping for a good harvest. You don't wait for the water to boil, your stomach growling louder than your mind. You drink. The taste is an odd mix of earth, algae. In the rusty smell of the tin spoon, your head feels a little dizzy, not from the water, but from hunger in the dry afternoon sun. You lie down, about to take a nap, when you suddenly hear a call from the forest. A group of people are looking for mushrooms. You join the group. Not because you love nature, but because you have heard that the forest behind the village has a type of white mushroom with a round cap, growing in a circle that is edible. You walk through the wet grass, stepping on the soft soil, your eyes straining as if searching for treasure, and you see it, a cluster of white mushrooms, your caps shiny like birthday cake frosting. Of course, you have never seen a birthday cake, but you imagine it is. You pick it, uncertain. An old man in the group looks at you and says softly, "This mushroom tastes good, but dies quickly." Another chimes in, "No, eating a little of it is just wishful thinking." And so the debate begins, is this an edible agaricus or a deadly amanita? You don't know. Modern historians don't know either. Medieval people distinguished mushrooms by smell, color, or courage. Some accounts say they used dogs or chickens to test them first. You don't have chickens. You don't have time. You take a small bite, chew thoroughly. Wait a few minutes. Nothing happens. The taste is slightly sweet, slightly bitter. It's like the smell of smoke wafting through grilled vegetables. You take the rest home. Cook it with a handful of wild herbs and it makes a mushroom soup, and you find it strangely delicious. Maybe it's because the mushrooms are actually safe. Maybe like a few hours later, when you see a shadowy figure dancing on the roof, it's a different sign. A strange fact. Europeans once believed that mushrooms growing in circles were fairy footprints, and if you ate them you would hear angels singing. You don't hear the angels, but you do hear your friend who died 2 seasons ago whispering in your ear, "It's better than bran cakes." You laugh, not sure if it is a dream or a delusion. Your head is spinning, but your belly is warm. You lie down, looking up at the straw ceiling, watching it slowly turn like a giant wheel. The next morning you wake up with a pounding headache and a rumbling stomach, but you're still alive, which makes you think, maybe the mushroom didn't kill you, it just caught you the limits of hunger. An academic debate remains. Were the ancients eating mushrooms on a traditional precept, or were they simply gambling? For you, gambling was an essential part of the medieval meal. You wipe away the sweat, drink the last of the soup, and sigh. You're still hungry, but you're also alive. And so you have another day to find. Something that crawls or grows or at least doesn't bite back. You sit in the corner of the tent, knees drawn up, looking out at the dirt road streaked with barefoot tracks. The giggle drifts in the distance. Children are playing Royal Feast. They're making cakes out of pebbles, using leaves as meat, even carving round lumps of earth and baking them on hot stones to make honey rice paper. You laugh, though your throat is so dry that your laughter sounds like wind whistling through cracked bamboo. You played that game when you were a kid. Now you're grown, hungry, and you know that baked clay was actually eaten. There's a documented incident after the famine of 1316 in remote rural areas of France and England. People baked mock cakes, a mixture of clay, ash, bran, candle oil, just to pretend to eat them before going to sleep. You stand up and walk past a group of children setting up a feast, and they sing, "Chicken pie, rabbit pie. Whoever eats it will grow a red beard." The rhyme is silly, but it breaks your heart, because you know that even children have learned to use their imagination to survive. You walk toward the abandoned church. There's an old altar, and under the altar someone says there used to be food hidden. You don't expect anything, but when you crawl in, what you find is a rotten book, some moldy rope, and a crockery bowl. No food, but an idea begins to form you. Take the bowl home, scoop water from the rain jar, add a few crumbs of bran cake, and sprinkle some ash to color. You set it out on a straw tray, telling yourself, "Today is St. John's Day," and you begin to imagine. You chew a mouthful, then close your eyes, trying to believe it's goat meat porridge. The next mouthful is a pie, and the last mouthful is raspberry jam. You eat it all, knowing it's not tasty. But for those few minutes, your brain is fooled. A warm feeling spreads down your stomach. It's like someone who just drank wine mixed with warm water. Here's a curious fact. Modern researchers call this a survival illusion, when the mind creates a false sense of taste to protect the body from falling into despair. They believe that medieval people not only ate to survive, but also imagined to avoid dying of boredom. You remember the old man in the village? He used to mold clay sausages out of mud? He would put them on a plate of leaves and sprinkle ash on them like pepper. When he ate them, he would close his eyes and say, "This is delicious." People would think he was crazy. But he survived that famine while many younger people didn't last a week. Historians still debate the role of imagination in times of famine. Was it simply a natural consequence of hunger? Or a learned survival strategy? You don't. Imagine for fun. You imagine because otherwise you'd go mad? That evening you set out the feast, a pot of hot water, a piece of ash-soaked leaf, and the remaining bran. You light a small oil lamp and whisper an imaginary invitation. "Please, Count, have some chestnut bread. Here's some fresh fig juice, Princess." And you laugh to yourself softly. In the silence, someone walks by. A neighbor child looks in and asks, "Are you really eating?" You hand him a piece. He chews slowly, then nods. It's like St. John's worship. And you have just shared something more precious than a meal hope. You clear the tray, put away the bowls, and lie down. Your stomach is still hungry, but your heart feels lighter. Because while your imagination is alive, you are not dead. You were sitting in the doorway of your tent when you saw him approach. A tall man in a tattered cloak that smelled of melted candles and rotting onions, carrying a bag larger than a priest's honor at tax time. He introduced himself as a merchant from the south, his voice trailing like honey dropped on wet ground. You're alert, but your stomach isn't. He opens the bag and reveals his wares. A bottle of golden honey, no doubt a tree sap. A block of cheese, actually clay mixed with lamb fat. Several bars of praline, which appear to be roasted roots. And a piece of jerky advertised as premium venison on lead. One piece left. The smell reminds you of wet socks hidden under the stove. You have no money. But you have a shovel that works, and you haven't used it since the field turned into a useless mud puddle. The guy agrees to trade. In a little ceramic pot, he insists. You nod, and so you become the owner of a piece of suspect meat. One official event should make you more alert than you should. In Bruges in 1318. A merchant was hanged for selling fox meat disguised as boar meat. Some accounts even say it was human meat. But that doesn't stop. People like the merchant who just left your village. You take the venison home, cut it in half. The outside is dry and hard as wood. The inside is gray as old ash. You smell it. It's not dead. You roast it. The smoke smells like ironing clothes with burnt hay. You bite into its acrid, stringy. But if you close your eyes, you can fool yourself into thinking you're actually eating it. You give the rest to an old woman. She'll chews and smiles. At least it's not bran. You agree? And for a brief moment, eating with someone else feels like the best thing ever. Strange fact. Medieval people believed that if someone sold fake food, they would be punished by God by eating it themselves in hell. The image of a merchant sitting in eternal fire, gnawing on clay mixed with fat, makes you feel a little better. But the merchant doesn't stop at you. The next morning, you find him hawking his wares to the entire village. Brine for hunger. It's rainwater mixed with ashes. Pure white bread flour. It's bran mixed with earth. It's royal tea from Constantinople. It may have been the smell of his clothes, not the tea. Historians still debate how common food fraud was during famines. Was it a rare phenomenon or a means of survival? Some scholars defend the merchants. They merely reflected the desperation of the times. Others are more blunt. Hunger turns people to demons. You think there is nothing sadder than faith being sold with ashes and resin. That afternoon, you spy on the merchant. You see him secretly taste a piece of candy, grimace, and spit it out. So even he can't eat his own goods. You laugh, silently, then return, and dilute the rest of the venison with rainwater. The result is a soup with no discernible flavor. But at least you know you didn't die from believing too much. And that night, as you stare up at the ceiling of your tent, feeling your stomach growl from whatever you just swallowed, you think, if you wake up tomorrow, you won't change anything unless you actually smell meat. You never thought of becoming a thief. But when your stomach is twisting like a snake and the last of the bran has been gone for 3 days, morality suddenly becomes a luxury, and you're not the only one. The whole village knows about the Lord's granary, guarded by a soldier with a belly bigger than his knees. Rumors have it, there's black bread inside, stored from last season. Moldy? Probably brick dry? Probably, but still bread. An incident that happened in Flanders in 1316 sticks in your mind, for peasants were hanged for stealing moldy bread from the parish storehouse. The story spread throughout the land, and while the elders preached that sin is worthy of death, the hungry simply asked, how much did they eat? That night, you crawl out of your tent, dodging the barking dogs and the sound of footsteps. The barn is not large, but it is tall. The door is locked with a rusty iron chain. You don't have to open it, just creep through the back, where someone has removed some boards. Inside, it is dark and damp. You find rows of grain bags smeared with turpentine and a basket of black bread that is as hard as a rock. You pick one up. It's covered in mold, but you scrape it off thinking, if it's white mold, it's edible. If it's green mold, ... pray, you stuff it in your shirt, slip out like a ghost. A strange fact you may have heard from a traditional healer: a certain type of mold, when used properly, helps to fight stomach aches. He calls it the powder of immortality, of course. He himself nearly died from poisonous mushrooms, so his words are often ignored. You take the bread home and reheat it. The fire is weak, the bread is burnt, but the smell is real. The smell of wheat, of something that was planted, not picked from the ground. You take a bite, and your teeth feel like they're going to snap. But you don't stop. The second bite is softer. The third brings tears to your eyes, not from emotion, but from the mold that's left behind, stinging your throat. Historians debate whether eating moldy foods caused some medieval hysterias. Some believe that. Bread moldy with ergot, a fungus that grows on barley, once caused entire villages to hallucinate. You don't know, but after eating the bread, you dream that you're lying in a meadow, eating green bean soup with a silver spoon. Just a dream of an empty stomach. You give the rest to a young mother with 2 children. She takes it with trembling hands, tears falling into your eyes. I thought I forgot the taste of bread, she says. You don't reply, know the feeling all too well. The next day, a patrolman walks through the village shouting, whoever stole the warehouse, come out. No one moves. The guard walks around once, then walks away, scratching his belly. You exhale as light as ashes. Another academic debate persists. Were the existence of emergency granaries really for relief? Or were they merely to protect the power of the elite? You don't need a textbook to know when hunger knocks on the door, the only thing that makes a louder noise than a stomach. That night, you burn some more wood to toast the remaining crumbs of the cake. The smell of burnt cake lingers around the thatched roof. You think, if there's one thing you never want to forget, it's this smell, the taste of survival no matter the cost. The sky was still gray, and so was your heart. The famine had lasted longer than expected. No one was laughing in the village square. No roosters crowed. No fires burned as they did in the early winter. People were silent, walking like breathing ghosts. But then came the rumor. The priest was going to hold a miracle meal in the church. You're skeptical. Some call it the pray your stomach trick. Others believe it that if you pray together and share whatever's left, God will see and take pity. You decide to go. It's not out of faith, but in the hope of getting something to eat. Inside the church, candles burned dimly, the smoke stinging your eyes. The scent of incense mixed with the smell of people, rotting cloth, and a faint, distant smell of bean porridge. On the altar, the priest placed a small loaf of bread, as hard as a bone. Beside it was a jug of wine or, perhaps very diluted grape juice. Here's a historical fact you may have heard about. During the Great Famine in Germany in 1315, many regions held communion feasts to lift the spirits of their villagers. During the feast, a loaf of bread was divided into 100 portions, and each person received only the size of a fingernail, yet they were moved to tears. You stand in a long line waiting your turn. The person in front of you receives a small piece of bread the size of the tip of your little finger. You receive the same. It is as light as dust, but in your hands it feels like gold. The priest whispers, "This is his body." You're not a religious person, but you nod because you understand. This is not about belief. It is about life. Here's a strange fact. People in the Middle Ages believed that if you shared your last meal, you wouldn't starve because God would send you food in your dreams. You used to laugh at that. Now, you just wish you could dream of a roast chicken tonight. You eat the cake. It's so dry your teeth feel like they're going to pop out. But it's warm. Warm because you're eating it with someone else. And sometimes a belly doesn't need much, just knowing you're not alone in your hunger. Historians still debate the role of religion during the famine. Some say the rituals were simply a way to delay despair. Others say they kept society from collapsing completely. You don't know which theory is correct. But you do know, if you hadn't gone to church that day, you wouldn't have eaten that little piece of cake, and probably wouldn't have had anything to believe in at the end of the service. You sit back and listen to the pastor tell a story. From the gospel about the miracle of the loaves and fishes, a little child asks, "Father, can we pray for real fish?" The whole church laughs softly. Not loud, not crispy, but real. And it warms your heart. That night, you sleep near the altar. Next to you are an old woman, a young man, and a boy holding a cat. You no longer feel alone in your hunger. You dream. In your dream, you sit around a long table with fresh bread, soft cheese, bean soup, and sweet dried figs. No one pushes, no one cries, and you don't need to hide food under your shirt. You wake up when it's still dark. There's no bread, no soup. But you're still warm, because you're not dreaming alone. You hear the first sound of midnight, the familiar pitter-patter, mixed with the steady breathing of the people huddled around you in the church. Rain, not a drizzle. Real rain. Heavy rain. You jump up, your heart pounding like a drum at a procession. You run outside, the feeling of mud under your feet no longer hateful. The smell of wet earth, of crushed grass, and the cold seeping through your thin shirt as if the sky were washing it all away. You tilt your head back. Open your mouth, drinking the first drops, like a baby suckling at its mother's breast. The rainy season has come. One historical event comes to mind in 1318. After 3 years of terrible famine across Europe, some regions began to see rain again in late June. People recorded the event as a blessing from heaven, not because of the heavy rain, because it was timely, before the last harvest. Completely failed, you rush back to your tent, pulling out moldy beans and bits of millet from your cloth. bag stuff you thought would never grow again. But today, the ground is soft, the rain is steady, and you sow. You are not alone. All over the village, people as thin as dried beanstalks are also going to the fields. No one says anything. They just plant. Their faces are covered in mud, but no one cares. Some people cry while planting, not because of the pain, but because they hope to secretly return, even if it is in the form of a few leaves that have not yet sprouted. A curious fact, in some parts of France, people used to hold resowing ceremonies rites, in which children carried seeds around the fields and sang to call the rains back. No one has proven that it worked, but famine survivors say as long as you sow, you will not die. You sing too, softly no one can hear. A song without melody, just a murmur to the sound of the rain. You place each drop as if placing hope, then cover it with mud like a thin blanket for a child. Historians still debate. After the famine, was it faith in the land that brought people together more than religion or politics? You don't read the books, but you know when someone gives you their last handful of beans to plant together. It's the most holy act you've ever witnessed. A week passes. The first green shoots emerge. Tiny, shaky, but real. You reach out to touch them, afraid they are a hallucination. But they are not. They are real beans. You dare not pick them. Wait. By the 10th day, you have pulled up a handful just enough for a thin meal. You divide it into 3 portions, for yourself, for the old woman who shared the mushrooms, and for the boy who gave you the cake of earth at the beginning of the famine. The 3 of you eat together, sitting close together under the straw roof. No one says anything, but the look in your eyes says it all. We are still here. That night, you sleep soundly for the first time in months. No dreams, no fears, no fantasies. Just sleep. The next morning, the sun rose. No more gray. No more cold. Just a normal morning, and normal had never been so good. Thank you for following this far. Hopefully tonight's story has brought you back to an ancient world where people were small but never lost their resilience. Good night and sweet dreams.